All right, we just want to talk about Python for a minute. Python can be used as a scripting tool, automation tool. It's great for certain things, and we need to have that in our arsenal as well as we become a proficient system administrator. So just a quick review, since it might be a year or two since you've taken Python. First thing we'll look at is loops. So if you remember, here's a syntax for a loop. So this will go through 10 times. So for I in range 10, print I. That's a for loop. That will go through 10 times. Here's a while loop. We start off I at 0. As long as I is less than 10, we'll print out and we'll increment our counter variable inside that. So there's loops. Decision statements. We use an if syntax. Remember, we have our colon here at the end. We could have an else. So let's say that I set a variable x equal to 3. If x is greater than 2, then we're going to print out something. Otherwise, else, we're going to print out something else. So there's a quick if statement review, and certainly you can look those up as you have more questions. One thing that we might not have done a lot in CS 1400 is the line up here at the top, just like when we did our shell scripting. This tells, when we make this an executable program, this tells the interpreter that that we should use the Python interpreter to process the following commands. So anyway, the sys module could be useful in that it allows us to pass in command line arguments. So if I say if the length of sys.argv, so if the length of my system arguments is not equal to 2, then maybe I print out, I don't have enough arguments, and I will print out the arguments that they passed in. So what that allows me to do is it allows me, if this was called foo.py, if I were to pass in 1, 2, 3 command line arguments, it would say, hey, that's not equal to 2, you passed in 3. So anyway, sys.argv will give us, I think, as a list. Yeah, it's a list of the arguments that we passed in. And if you remember how to process lists, you could always say, well, give me sys.argv sub 0 or sys.argv sub 1 or whatever it might be, and then do your processing with it. So I would encourage you to take these examples and load up my slides, copy and paste these into a Python program, make it executable, and test them out. Make sure you understand how it works. So another thing I might want to do is loop through a file. Now I showed you how to do loops again, but let's say that we had a file called animals.txt that just had a few lines in it like this: cows, chicken, goats, and horses. You open a file, if you recall, by saying open and then the file name. After that, you could put, maybe I'm opening it in read mode or write mode or append mode. You can go look that up on your documentation. Gives us back a file handle. And then we can say, well, I want to loop through every line in that file by saying something like for line in F. And then we could, as we go through each line, we could strip the white space, maybe by doing the strip function, and then we could print out the line. So that's how I might loop through a file. Functions, useful as well. You say def, and then the name of the function, any arguments you're going to pass in, and then you can print those arguments out if you want. We can return stuff from a function as well. We can capture that return value when we call the function. So here's why I pass in 4 and 5. 4 is being passed into arg1, 5 into arg2. Okay, so that was a quick review. Now, there are some modules or some libraries you can import there that are, I don't know, probably more relevant to a system administrator. Subprocess is one of those. And you can read about what a subprocess does, but it does more than just, basically it says open up a subshell and run this command. And the most common way that I've used it as a system administrator is to run an SSH command. So really, here I'm passing in maybe my host, I'm creating a variable called hostname and the command that I want to run on that machine. So this says, let's open a sub shell, if you will, a sub process, and in that subshell, we're going to run the SSH command. We're going to SSH over to this host, and we're going to run this command via SSH. You could read about all these other things about what these are doing. Basically, they're grabbing any standard out messages and standard error messages. Anyway, we can go run that. We're going to SSH over to that machine and run uname -a. If we want to capture that output, we can say, okay, give me the standard output and read lines, and we can store that in result, and then you can print that out and see what it is. It's probably a list again. So we can say, for example, if it's an empty list, and say, hey, let's figure out what the error messages were from that command, and we'll print out the error messages. Otherwise, we'll print out the result. So that's one way of SSHing into a machine and getting the results. Another common module would be the OS module for Python. Here's an example. This allows us to, for example, change directory, list directories, that sort of thing. So we import it, os.listdir. I want to list what's in the samples directory. Here's another one. Get my current working directory. Change the directory. Make a directory, remove a directory. So we can do all these things programmatically using Python. Here's another one that's kind of long, but let's see. This one, I pass in a file name, import time module. So this one, I'm saying get the stats for a file name. That's the file name I want to get it for. We're calling the stat function from the OS module, printing those out. We can open the file again. We can do a lot of different stuff. And this is the dump function. After I call the stat or grab the stats for the particular file name, we can then go in and say, well, from the stats basically gives us back this list that has all this stuff in it, and you can play with that and get stuff out of it as well. Just another example of using the OS module. We can see what the name of the operating system is. We can run a system command, whatever. Probably the last thing maybe that's, I think, common and relevant in Python for system administrators, maybe sending an email. So, and as an example, and there's probably other libraries you could do this with, you can import the SMTP library, specify the server and the port, and do this. And basically, there's my message. That's who I'm sending it. I can't remember which one is from and which one's to. We'd have to look up the documentation. But anyway, as a system administrator, we should be comfortable looking up documentation. That's a quick overview of Python for system administrators.